What I'm doing now is I am basically doing a breakdown of the class, what the class is about, strengths and weaknesses, playstyles, all the different spells, new weapons for this class. Basically, I'm just going to do like a breakdown of everything. And then the Glint Sorcerer is one of the ones that people coming into the mod are like the most familiar with. Glint Sorcery, Glint Stone Sorcery, and Carian Sorceries were already in the base game, and we combined Glint Stone and Carian into one school instead of them being split apart. And the reason for that, we want to keep things focused based on damage type and scaling type. This is one of the straightforward, quintessential magic classes, right? Like in Dark Souls, this was like the Soul Sorcerer. This is no frills, just straight up damage. So basically, you are a straight damage class with no auxiliary effects. You're also just intelligent scaling and only magic damage. But you have some of the best buffs that deal with resource management in terms of they don't have to like set up status effects. They don't have to do a lot of crap. They're just, I'm going to shoot you directly with a spell and it's going to hit you and do damage. But there's really three playstyles here. One is the pure caster. I am a mage. I wear lighter armor. I care about my mana or my FP. I care about increasing the damage of my spells, and I kind of want to stay away from you, right? That's the first playstyle. The second is the hybrid, which is where you're doing a combination of casting spells to do damage and buff yourself, and then also you have a main hand weapon. Now, I know that this playstyle is incredibly common throughout the mod. People love to do this. And then there is the pure melee glint concept, where the idea is you're primarily doing your damage with the weapon, but you might be using spells for the occasional damaging spell, or mostly just buffs, or maybe only buffs. What we want to do with every class is to have support for sort of those three playstyles for every class, if possible, to a certain degree. So when I'm thinking about starting with this class, first question I'm asking myself is, which one am I going for? Like, am I inspired by a magic damage weapon? Or am I just going to go pure spells? Like, if I was going pure spells, then I probably am wanting to start with like an Enchanted Remnant or something, so I can have faster casting speed from Radagon's Icon, or faster FP regen from the Cerulean Seed, or whatever it might be. So now let's talk about the spells themselves. All right, so top of the list, Swift Glintstone Shard. This is a vanilla spell. Really fast casting speed. And it just shoots a projectile. So Swift Glintstone Shard, just your basic run-of-the-mill pew-pew spell. It's good, it's quick speed. Nothing wrong with it, but also not that interesting, right? It's just one of your basic starter spells. The next one is Carian Slicer. Obviously, it's one of the most insanely powerful spells in vanilla if you're set up for it. It has been adjusted in the mod. Basically, it's less mana efficient than it used to be, and the amount of DPS is probably around the same, maybe a touch less comparatively. It's still very good. It's just costs you a decent amount of FP. But yeah, it's still just a vanilla spell. Same with Glintstone Arc. So Glintstone Arc is actually really interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. One of the biggest weaknesses of this class of Glint Sorcery, and it was true in Dark Souls 3 and other ones previous, that Soul Sorcery suffers because it can't do very good damage in AoE at range. All of its AoE, all the things that hit in an area around it, are usually close by. Things like Carian Greatsword or Slicer or whatever, they can do AoE, but that's because they're kind of coming from you. You're doing a slashing motion. So the presence of Glintstone Arc is actually it fills kind of a cool niche because it allows you to do at least some area damage at range, which is kind of one of the biggest weaknesses of the class. So one of the new spells we've added is Energy Shell. Energy Shell basically is sort of our take on Mana Shield in a way. What it does is it lasts 3 minutes. It increases all absorption by 35%. Increases your total stamina by 10%. It's going to hit me. I'm going to lose some mana for that. But you can see how little he's doing to me. This sort of setup is ideal if you are going less focused on spell casting and more focused on being a hybrid or even just a pure melee player who needs extra buff of defense. Okay, next is Great Glintstone Shard. So this one's been repurposed. It used to be kind of the Glintstone Pebble animation, but now we're using the Swift animation. And the reason why is, like, I wanted it to be a pure upgrade to Swift Glintstone Shard, but it definitely costs more mana. So the idea is that like some classes who are just sort of dabbling, and it may not be the best for them. But for a pure caster, it would be considered a pure upgrade to Swift Glintstone Shard. The next two are both vanilla spells, Scholar's Shield and Scholar's Armament. Scholar's Shield increases your blocking ability, makes you block better. And then Scholar's Armament, of course, is a weapon buff. And so like that's pretty much always good. You know, I mean, I think that Scholar's Armament is very strong, whereas Scholar's Shield is pretty niche, just in general, because shields in general are always going to be more niche. Carian Piercer has surprisingly wide application in this game. Obviously a vanilla spell, but just a really good one that I don't know if that many people... Like, I feel like some people kind of slept on this spell. It does really high damage. It knocks things back. It staggers NPCs to the floor, and it also does good poise damage. It can break poise, especially the full charge version. Like, this spell is just good. The other thing, too, is that if you were doing something like stylistic, like you were doing like a conjured weapons build, it's very long range. Like, look at how far that goes. It even goes a little farther than it looks like it goes. I've cast it before and been like, I'm not going to hit that guy, but then you end up hitting him. Piercer is very strong. We have repurposed the spell Lucidity into Sorcerer's Lucidity. Okay, so it lasts for 3 minutes, just like Energy Shell. Reduces the FP consumption of sorceries by 10%. Reduces weapon stamina cost by 10%, which is actually slightly inaccurate. It reduces the stamina cost of all attacks by 10%, including spells. And reduces the FP cost of weapon skills by 10%. So Ashes of War, weapon skills, their FP cost is reduced. The stamina cost of all attacks is reduced. And the FP cost of spells is reduced. This is very, very good. It's kind of what I was talking about before, is that it's resource management, right? It allows everything to be cheaper for 3 minutes, just giving, making everything easier in combat. So like, I can swing my weapon without losing much stamina when I'm in combat. This is going to have reduced cost of your Ash of Wars. And then also your spells are going to have reduced cost as well. So the thing about this spell, which is interesting, is that you're not going to get full value out of it unless you are doing a hybrid. Like, it's probably good for every build, right? But you're not getting every bit of that value unless you're using all of these things, right? Using Ash of Wars, using spells, using, everything. But definitely a highlight for hybrids. Okay, next is Carian Greatsword. So nothing changed here except it's a little faster than vanilla. Just a great spell. It's just one of your AoE options, which there are precious few of. Okay, and then the last one that I can attune right now is Tope's Barrier, and this is exactly the same as vanilla. Press and hold to continuously deflect magic. So, useful in some situations, though I can see in the future this spell getting a serious buff. Maybe removing some of the opportunity cost associated with using it, because right now when you're using it, you're not doing anything else, really, right? And that's sort of the problem with spell deflection. And plus, the timing of trying to deflect a spell like that is awkward. Like, you really have to predict when it's coming because of how slow this windup is. It's not saying that the windup is slow, but it's not a parry, right? It's just not as fast as a parry. And it would be kind of handy if it were. So, next set of spells. Shard Spiral. Great Blade Phalanx. Carian Acuity, Glintstone Breath, Gavel of Haima, Starlight, Comet Shard, Carian Phalanx, Floretta's Greatbow, Glint Beam Orb, Smareg's Glintstone Breath. Okay, so the next set of spells, Shard Spiral, another vanilla spell. So the strength of this spell, which was also the strength of the spell in vanilla as well, is really large enemies that have like a lot of hitbox for the spiral to travel through. Because the more that this travels through something, the more damage it deals. And so large enemies like Rykard, like Elden Beast, like, Fire Giant Phase 2, things like that, they get shredded by Shard Spiral. It's just completely crazy. And so it's a spell that's like not necessarily the best when you're just fighting random enemies. but is completely insane when you're fighting very large enemies. And there's usually a spell or two in almost every class with this sort of option. You can aim up versus tall enemies. That's true too. Of course, even gargoyles, it's frustrating to use against, but that's mostly because gargoyles hop and jump and leap, and their body shape is strange. But yeah, still really useful in that niche. Great Blade Phalanx. So, of all of the Phalanx style spells, right? So we have removed the initial Phalanx spell, the Glintstone Phalanx or Glint Blade Phalanx or whatever it is, because it just seemed like it was redundant when you have it next to like Carian Phalanx and Great Blade Phalanx. See, Great Blade has a niche because it actually deals pretty decent poise damage. There's very few like spell projectiles that deal decent poise damage, but this is one. And so like this spell, the damage on it is fine, but the poise damage I think kind of makes it worth it. Okay, Carian Acuity, this is another new one. It's a buff, lasts 3 minutes. Increase magic weapon damage by 5%. And each time you hit with a weapon, it restores 5 FP. So this is obviously built for hybrids. It's built if you're using a weapon. So I cast Acuity. And whammo, I get some FP back. It also increases my damage by a little bit. Once again, we're focusing on resource management, and 5% weapon damage is fine. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. But it's only the magic damage of your weapons, and this was very intentional because weapons in the mod, obviously, they don't do split damage anymore. They do pure magic. Like, if you look at that weapon, all magic. If you look at this weapon, all magic. So it's increasing my weapon damage by 5%. But if I was using something that wasn't magic damage, then I would get nothing out of it. Right. This is the sort of spell that could allow you to maintain, like, a energy shell, for example. Yes, and so things that count for weapon damage also count for most conjured weapons, right? So most conjured weapon spells. Carian Slicer, Carian Greatsword, I believe, also works. I mean, it's kind of amazing with Carian Slicer, because it essentially makes Slicer free. Or even better than free, in some cases. Of course, you're always going to be somewhat limited by your stamina. Okay, so I mean, Acuity, it's very simple. It doesn't have a hugely dramatic effect, but that effect is so good that it kind of doesn't matter that it's on the simpler side of things. All right, so now we get to another vanilla spell. So Dragon Communion has been repurposed so that all the Dragon Communion spells have been split apart and placed in various other spell schools because there's no unifying damage type amongst the Dragon Communion spells. So because part of the balance of the mod is about keeping everything unified in damage type, that we kind of had to split them up a bit. And so this is literally the same spell as vanilla. So this one I actually really like because of the weaknesses we were talking about before. Something that this class lacks is the ability to do AoE damage at long range. This spell lets that happen. It's stepping outside the typical role of the class. And so the fact that it is a dragon head and it is on the slower side, I think is somewhat acceptable. Like, it's fine because of the fact that it's not something the class necessarily does well. Gavel of Haima, in my opinion, is basically just like an alternative to Carian Greatsword, but it basically just hits harder and does more poise. It does like a lot of poise damage, this thing. The way we built, like the way we designed it, is that it really smacks with poise. The other thing too is it's so indiscriminate, you know, like I can just start using it and usually I can just like hit guys before they get to me. It just has great utility for the AoE. Once again, this class really doesn't focus on AoE, and when it does have AoE, it's usually when it's in melee range. Starlight, which was the spell that just gave you essentially a light source in vanilla, now it gives you a 5% buff to Glint Sorcery, so it increases the damage of your Glint Sorceries by 5%, and adds 1 additional FP regen per second, but it also never expires. It lasts until warp or death, basically. So the thing about that is essentially just a free buff. Lasts forever. There's kind of no reason not to use it. The FP regen is, I mean, some people read 1 FP regen per second and think, oh, that's really weak. But that is not weak at all. Because your base FP regen is 1 per second in the game. So this is essentially 100% increase to your base FP regen, which is insane. Next is... So Glintstone Comet Shard is the first that's using the Comet animation, where basically it's chargeable, right, in this series, right? Like as you progress, this would be the first one that uses this animation. So much longer range, much higher damage, and then also you can full charge it. So this is when the pure caster options starts to really matter, is when you get things like that. Like, you don't really necessarily care about spells like this if you're going pure hybrid or if you're going, like, pure melee. Except for maybe if you just needed additional range. But even then, if you're going for just, like, big range, then you'd use something else. Like, you wouldn't use this. Like, you might go for Loretta's Great Bow or something. But, you know, it's just your standard, like, I shoot and deal damage, right? Like, this is kind of like the bread and butter of this class. Carian Phalanx, the most powerful of the Phalanx spells in terms of damage, but not the most powerful in terms of poise, right? That's what the Great Blades is for. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously a great spell, right? Like, be able to precast damage in situations where you have a moment. And sometimes it does cool things like that, and it's two things. So Loretta's Great Bow. So this is like one of the longest range spells in the game to a certain degree. It's certainly one of the earliest ultra long range spells that you get access to as a Glint Sorcerer, right? The range on this is pretty strong. And we have edited the spell quite a bit, so the non-charged version is much faster than the base game. We felt that the speed that it was before was a little too punitive. It was just like really punishing you for shooting something from far away. But the full charge is the same. Just a great spell, because that range is so ridiculously strong. It just goes really, really far. And the damage on it's very strong too. So you definitely, there's no downside to it. Okay, one of our new spells, Glint Beam Orb. I'm going to turn off my Starlight for this. So Glint Beam Orb, it has charged and non-charged versions. Here's the non-charged. You make an orb. It shoots a beam that kills things. The beam also has tracking out of the orb. So it'll stay shooting that guy even if he's running all the way across the screen. And then the full charge version makes 3 orbs. So I can tell you from experience that there is very few things more satisfying than using Anima Magicka, having the ultimate proc, having a triple Glint Beam Orb up, and then using Comet Azure on something. You are laser. It's amazing. So Smaragd's Glintstone Breath, same as the previous one, just you float in the air. You can use it while you're jumping. The channeling lasts a little longer. The range goes a little further. But just like vanilla. All right, next set of spells. Comet, Renala's Full Moon, Loretta's Mastery, Comet Azure, Anima Magicka. And I'm going to have Glint Beam Orb on just to show you what I'm talking about. So Comet, just like Comet Shard, just stronger. It's exactly the same, just stronger. Costs more FP, does more damage. Really, really strong. Your best, your top tier damage dealing projectile that isn't ridiculously slow. Very good spell, very satisfying. Renala's Full Moon. Now this spell, pretty interesting. Obviously from vanilla, it has a certain intention to it, right? Uses the caster as a vessel to incarnate a full moon, then sends it forward toward foes. Full moon dispels all sorcery that touches it and temporarily reduces magic damage negation for those it strikes. So there's like a lot of text on that for vanilla, you know, and like FromSoft doesn't usually do all that much text. But the casting speed on it is pretty slow, right? You're doing this. But here's the thing, is it takes a second to get there. And then when it does get there and it hits something, they get a debuff that makes them take more damage. And so, in my mind, this is one of the best opening spells that you can cast in a boss fight where something has a lot of HP. So, if you have an opportunity to cast it without them being aggroed, then oftentimes, or you have a second or whatever, then you just open with this. And then you can even start launching before it gets there, and you can combo them. It's just really, really good for that. But other than that, like casting it in the middle of a fight, no, I don't think so. Unless the enemy is trying to shoot you with spells that will be deflected by the full moon, right? If the full moon can actually like dispel things that they're shooting at you, then sure, then it's actually defensive. But other than that, no. Really cool spell though. So Loretta's Mastery, basically the same thing as Loretta's Great Bow, except even greater range and greater damage. The range of this spell is actually quite absurd. It's more than I thought it was initially. Okay, and then of course your classic Comet Azure, no changes here. No changes because we had some certain concepts in mind with it. For example, we changed the physic that makes spells free. We changed the physic that instead of making spells free for 10 seconds, what we did was we make spells cost half for a longer period of time, like 30 seconds, right? Or maybe even a minute, I don't remember. And we realized because making spells free was kind of inherently too strong. But that's kind of getting to my next point, which is the final spell, Anima Magicka. So we replaced Terra Magicka with Anima Magicka. And I will just read it. This effect never expires. Recast to toggle the effect. Okay. Infuse your body with power, causing each Glint Sorcery you cast to increase the damage of Glint Sorceries by 1%. This effect stacks up to 9 times. When you cast your 10th Glint Sorcery, all previous stacks are cancelled and you gain a buff for 30 seconds. That buff increases the damage of all Glint Sorceries by 15%, reduces the FP cost of sorceries by 20%, and grants 20 FP regeneration per second, and you gain additional poise. While active, this effect is active, you cannot gain stacks. So basically, we gave you Super Saiyan. That's what Anima Magicka does. It's on all the time. Doesn't matter, it's just going to stay on. And then when you cast 10 things... So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Alright, so my next cast is going to trigger the ultimate effect. So I'm going to use Glint Beam Orb to trigger the effect. So just to kind of explain what I was talking about before. So let's say that this right here is, oh, I don't know, Elden Beast or Fire Giant or something. Look at my FP. So, 20 FP regen per second. This was the whole concept of this class, right? Like, this is the thing I wanted to really bring together, right? Right now, we don't have an ultimate buff for the other builds, like the hybrids and the melee. Not yet. But this is the one really for the pure caster, right? It's not necessarily that it's bad for the hybrids, because it's nothing but upside. Hey, TJ, thank you so much for the 5 gift subs. Really appreciate that. But that moment where you've set up your proc on Anima and then you go for it, you can just annihilate. It's so satisfying. It's like one of the most fun things you can do. Now, there's some other details I should mention. Some little cool things. For example, let's say I cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's not 10. But look at Comet Azure, look what happens. It goes off while I'm casting it. Because it triggered every single laser blast of the Comet Azure counts as one trigger for Anima. So you don't have to be perfectly sitting at 9 or 10 before you cast it. You could cast it early if you need to. So that is all the Glintstone spells right now for the mod. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about some weapons now. So I'd say the two big ones that are Glint in theme that are new that we've added are the Glintstone Cleaver and the Celestial Blade. So the Glintstone Cleaver, one of my personal favorites. I said make it look like the Glintstone Chris. And it fucking does. This weapon is really cool, man. Like, you've got a kind of a standard axe moveset, one-bladed, one-sided axe. But then it's got this weapon art here. Ogre, thank you for the 28 months. Tier 3. Tier 3. One of the golden cushions. Thank you, bro. So, this is the weapon art, 1, 2, 3. But then, 4... that follow-up, though. Super fun. Just incredibly fun to use. And then, of course, the weapon everyone's talking about, the Celestial Blade. Arguably the best weapon in the mod right now. It's funny because numerically it's not the strongest weapon in terms of damage, but it doesn't matter because this moveset is so absurd. Alright, R1s, typical. Greatsword R1s. Nothing fancy going on here. R2s, same deal. But then you have this weapon art. Okay, so if you tap L2, you get yourself a little teleport. That's if you tap. And it goes a little further if you're locked on. If you hold L2, it does that. If you hold L2 and let go, oh, you cancel into a teleport. If you hold L2, tap L2, you teleport in a quick combo. Now here's where it gets interesting. After you do any of these attacks, whether you do the teleport or the hold, you'll notice the blade is glowing now. When the blade is glowing, it changes your R2s into that attack. Now here's the cool part. If you do any of these combos, you can combo out of it with a teleport. If you're using the R2s that are different alternate R2s, they link into combos with the teleport. Any part of them do. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, teleport. Or you could go 1, 2, teleport. Can you chain teleport without the slam? You cannot. If you teleport, you have to slam. The teleport does have iframes. Yes, 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 it does. So those are the two standout weapons for now in Glint, I think, are the most interesting ones. So next little bit we'll talk about is armors. Like I said, there's kind of 3 paths with, you know, all the spell classes. The armor set I'm currently wearing, which is the Spellblade set, which is Roger's set, is designed around the hybrid concept. So it increases your intelligence by 2, endurance by 1, and increases all magic damage by 1. So the ones that say all damage of a certain type are designed for hybrids because it's going to buff your spell damage and your weapon damage. So this one's really designed for the hybrid build. It also is giving you endurance, which kind of signifies that they're expecting you to be using a weapon. Another one is the Carian Knight set. Carian Knight set is designed around the pure melee, or the more pure melee user, because it increases intelligence, reduces weapon stamina cost, and increases magic weapon damage. Magic weapon damage obviously indicates this is designed for melee, right? And it doesn't boost spells at all. Still really good though, for sure. And like, so the scheme with all the armors is that the auxiliary pieces or the peripheral pieces like the head, gloves, and legs all boost the same amount, and then the chest piece boosts double that. So this is int by 4, stamina cost by 4, and magic weapon damage by 4. So all combined, it comes out to 10%, or 10 in this case, right? And then the Pure Caster set is the Preceptor set. And this is going to give you int by 2, reduces FP cost of sorcery by 4, and increases damage of Glint Sorcery by 2. It's going to reduce the FP cost of sorcery by 20%, the whole set, which is really strong. But then it's also giving you 10 intelligence and 10% damage of your spells, but only your spells, not your weapon. So if you're going Pure Caster, there really is no better option than this. I mean, I say that, but there are some alternates. So Azur's set increases mind, reduces FP costs, and increases all magic damage. So it's weaker on the magic damage, but better on the FP, basically. So yeah, there's a few variations on these sets like that you could find just because there was a lot of armor that sort of focused around Glint Sorcery inherently, but that's, you know, these are pretty much the ones you would go with, right? I mean, you could imagine wearing this set, Anima Magicka procced, casting Comet Azure, they have a Renalis Full Moon debuff on them, you have Glint Beam Orb up, you could just see how that critical mass that you can create is so ridiculous, right? It has the potential to be, if you play it right. That's really what the class is about as a pure caster. It's about setting up the kill condition. It's about setting up that moment where you're just going to go crazy. You know, on the other side of things, the more hybrid builds, you have a lot of options. You have a lot of conjured weapon options. You know, something simple like Slicer is insanely effective. Putting up Phalanxes is really good too. Putting up Carian Piercer is really good. You know, poise damage. There's just a lot of choices. The interesting thing about this class is that a lot of those choices relate to offense. They all relate to like what kind of offense are you going to use, like which combination of things. It gives you a lot of choices, but it doesn't create a lot of like layers. When you have like a whole bunch of different attacks, then sometimes it's better to build things where it allows the player to create layers of just like got these buffs, these debuffs, and then these attacks, and keep each thing kind of small so that they're not overloaded with options. But my thinking here is that not every style of Glint Sorcerer is going to want every single one of those. You know, like if you're more a pure spellcaster, you're going to gravitate more towards certain types of effects. If you're more a hybrid, you're going to gravitate toward other types of effects, and you're going to find exactly the things you like within it. And of course, that's not even to mention, you know, multi-classing, where you're using other spells from other stuff, which I know people really like to do. For myself, I actually get the most enjoyment playing classes exactly pure, like completely pure, without doing any multi-classing at all. And that's something that when we were building the spells, one of the reasons why we built so many was to allow that, so that you could do it and not be bored. You could do just Glint Sorcery and feel like, I have to use this one thing the whole time. You know, we wanted the players to feel like they had dynamics within it. So yeah, that's it. That's the class breakdown. Hope you guys liked it. We're going to make an edited video out of the class breakdowns. I'm going to do a class breakdown for all the classes in the mod. So yeah, go check out the YouTube and subscribe. I need more subscribers on YouTube, chat. Okay, now the YouTube stuff's out of the way, I can do stuff now. How's it going, chat? What's up? How are you?